right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libertarian Lens. We haven't done one of these in a while.
It's great to have everyone here. We're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Rumble. And please join the conversation. If you want to chat with us, please do. We can put your chats on screen and we can respond to questions as we go. And the general theme of tonight is a conversation. We've wanted to have a conversation about the Davos Mark Carney speech and what it means, if anything. So that kind of brings us together. We also have a special guest tonight, so I'm going to feature our friend Steve here in the center. Steve, if you could please introduce yourself and sort of introduce the topic, and then I've got a few questions to lead through the conversation. Over to you, Steve. Tell everyone where you are and how you know us and what brings you to the conversation tonight.
Thanks a lot, David. So I live in southern Utah, in a little town called St. George, about 2 hours north of Vegas. David and I have done some podcasting and had some interesting conversations in the past, but it's been a while, probably a couple of years or more. And when I saw Mark Carney's speech, I don't follow a ton of Canadian politics anymore. I grew up there, left when I was about 23 years old. Been living in the United States for about almost 30 years now. And but yeah, that struck me, and so I just hit David up on Facebook or Messenger or something and said, what did you think? And he said, I don't know, let's talk about it live. So here we are.
And here we are. So Jacques, you and I, of course, behind the scenes also had some conversation after this speech. My first question maybe for both of you is, what were your reactions to the speech? What stood out for you? Maybe that'll help everyone kind of hear your initial thoughts, and then we'll dive into specific questions as we go.
Who should go first?
Go ahead, Jacques. Over to you.
Well, my first thought was actually not a reaction to the speech itself, but to the reaction of the sycophant that followed Carney, hailing this as one of the greatest speeches ever given. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, coming from a man that I think has got an awful lot of skeletons in the closets. But then when I read because I decided not to listen to him, I read the transcript instead, and I was at a loss to explain why people thought it was such a great speech. As far as I can tell, there's lots of words, lots of nice words, sophisticated words, but they amount to word salads. And actually, I mean, we'll talk about this more, but the man's a technocrat. He's the opposite of a libertarian. Everything is top down with people who need to turn dials left and right to get it just right. So the very premise of his speech was completely wrong, and he's bound for failure as well. But that's my immediate take on this.
I guess my first blush was a little more optimistic, or a little more. I appreciated it some. It goes back. I think of Pete Hegseth here in our country. I don't know if you get much media about him. What is he? The War Secretary now? We changed it to the Department of War. We're no longer at the Department of Defense. It's Department of War. And Pete Hegseth's favorite line is "F around and find out." And there was a little hint of that, not knowing. To be honest, I don't know Mark Carney's background. Like I said, not following Canadian politics a ton, but just from the tone and the text of the speech, it was like, we've enjoyed or been okay with, or we've all mutually tolerated this fiction that there is this unspoken rules internationally, and we all have a certain amount of respect for that status quo, so to speak. And and here is Trump completely upsetting that apple cart and starting this, I don't know, tear of the ends justifies the means and of might makes right, and here are some of the potential consequences of that. So more than, I don't know how much any speech ever changes anything. I mean, but more than his specific talk, discussion about what that would mean for Canada was just this warning. I don't know. He's not really in a position to warn, but to just point out this changes things. Like we're not even being polite anymore. We're just going to this might makes right sort of situation, and so here's how some of these middle powers may react to that. That was kind of my initial blush.
You're muted, David.
Thank you. So my initial reaction to the speech was to avoid it. Like I saw so much hype about it suddenly online, and people were talking about, and they were praising, and talking about his rhetoric, how this was going to be a remarkable speech, a remarkable moment in time, that he was signaling the end of the old order, and so I kind of avoided it at first, to read some of the reactions, and then I did go and I watched the entire speech and the Q&A that followed. It was partly the Q&A that followed that struck me more than the speech. The speech itself is just rhetoric, and it's we'll talk more about all of that, I'm sure. But in the Q&A that followed, he made all kinds of assertions that were just frankly not true. Like he talked about Canada, the provinces breaking down trade barriers. No, we haven't. He talked about investment, flowing into capital investment flowing into the country, and no, it's fleeing the country. He talked about how he's investing in infrastructure, and he's fast tracking these nation building projects and things like that, and all of that was again just more rhetoric and mistruths, misdirection. Jacques, if you want to follow up as well, and then I have a question for both of you.
Now, why don't we go to the question? Because
so, Steve, you mentioned, you kind of referenced Carney's moment in the speech where he talked about the supposedly the world's middle powers will now make coalitions and offset the rules-based order. He calls the rules-based order a lie, and he urged countries to take the sign down, which was this metaphor about, if one shopkeeper just takes down the sign, then that gives permission for all of the shopkeepers to stop living a lie. Was the Davos speech just elite theater? That's my question.
Well, I think it. Oh, sorry. Was that for Steve?
No, it's both of you.
Okay. I think it was. I think he played to the audience. This is an audience that wants this stuff. As I mentioned before, a top-down. It's almost like a cartel that he wants to organize with these middle powers, where there's agreement on all kinds of things. He certainly does not want jurisdictional competition. It has to be, think, for example, of a minimum corporate tax that many countries around the world were working on. That is precisely what he's all about, right? He does not want a country somewhere with a lower corporate tax because of all the detrimental impact that it would have on his own, say, taxing power. But that's just an example among many. right? I mean, we need to agree among countries on all kinds of, whether it's ESG or DEI. We all have to be on the same page. As I've said before, the man is fundamentally anti-freedom. It's all, and as an aside, not that I read the book, but many, many people have pointed out that Václav Havel's book was aimed at the horror of communism, and for Carney to use it essentially to try to put down globalism, which are not, the two are not on the same level at all, makes you wonder if he was once again disingenuous.
I agree with much of what you're saying regarding this. I think everyone was waiting. I think that he had a ready audience. Like, yeah, give us a reason to further talk about or further elucidate this idea of Trump bringing down the world order, or certainly destroying the world order. And I think the United States has had this place in the world of, some people call it the world's police or the world's cop, but we're not going to seek territory. We're not going to, be looking to upset things in that manner. We're not going to war with other countries. As much as we do some policing, it's not about fundamentally changing other people's ways of life, other than trying to export democracy or whatever. But Trump has changed that, and I guess I appreciated the way that Carney spoke about that. The words, just the words themselves, I guess, divorced from the man and his history. I thought it was a pretty eloquent way of saying this changes things.
Now, if I may here, because this was, we heard this from Trudeau's speech, which didn't get anywhere near as much airtime, thank goodness. But notice that both he and Carney you use the word assertion before, David, and it's the right word. They come out with these statements which are, held to be true, even though they aren't. And the one that I'm referring to is the assertion on the part of both of these people that the world as we used to know it is over. Like these very definitive statement that things have changed and they're not coming back. Now, there's zero basis to believe this. One of the things that bugs me, because it happens, I understand there's some convenience to this, but it's when people try to anthropomorphize, I believe is the word, entities that are not sentient being, right? Like Canada did this, the US did that, Canada thinks this, Canada does, and of course, it has nothing to do with the country. It has to do with the people who are in power, the people who do think, right? Okay, things are different right now, almost entirely because Donald Trump is acting differently than his predecessor. Okay, I grant things are different. But does this mean that it's going to be like this for the next 10 years and 20 years? There's a lot of people who fall prey for what I call the rear view mirror approach to what is going to happen, right? Whatever happened over those last 6 months means that's what we're going to have for the next 60 years. It's naive beyond comprehension to think that way. Donald Trump is not going to be there in 3 years. At that point, who knows who's going to replace him? But I pretty much guarantee that things are going to be different. And maybe if it's a Biden type, we're going to go back to the way things more or less were 5 years ago. Who knows? But to come out with these blunt statements right? That we have a rupture, or Trudeau, things are done, that they're not coming back. I mean, again, there's no basis whatsoever to make these claims, but I think they're made for the purpose, again, of frightening people.
Yeah, there's a few things I want to pop in and talk about. Well, like we can recognize that the USA is playing a different game today. And Jacques, you mentioned Carney speaking at Davos in front of a ready audience. I think that was the phrase you used, ready audience. Ready for what? Like if they were ready for free trade, for example, then we could recognize the USA is playing the game differently. Why not just say to all the countries and all the leaders there, hey, Canada is open for business. Canada is interested in trading with anyone fairly and have voluntary exchange between countries. But that's not what he said. He's speaking in front of a ready audience, and I think he believes they are ready for a new power play. And what I mean is, like all the anti-USA rhetoric in his speech. Just days after he was in Qatar and Beijing, he flies to Davos and he makes this speech about middle powers and the alignment with China. It's just very odd to me. And Steve, I want you to kind of speak next, but I wondered have you been watching Mark Carney's recent speeches? Like after he went to Beijing, he came back to Canada, and he, in a speech, highly televised, he talked about and I'm going to pause for drama effect like he did, the new world order. Carney believes there's a new opportunity here for creating a new power play, maybe with the UK, aligning with China, Qatar, India. I don't know, but it's all, it seems, against the United States, which is bizarre given the trade relationship that Canada has with the US.
Not sure if I'm directly answering what you're asking. I guess one thing I would ask, and maybe just to not pull it too different a direction, but do you think the world will forgive the United States for Trump should we end up with what I mean, if we stick with our cult of personality bent right now, I'm guessing the next president is Oprah. So we'll have a very liberal progressive version of Trump, but I'm not sure how a statesman or a statesperson can get back into the White House at this point. And that's so internally, I'm wondering, can we come back from Trump and go back to a politician who understands politics, or will we be simply whoever can garner the most clicks? Or the most money, and then complementary to that idea, will the world go back to like, okay, we've got a sane politician, statesperson with some logic and some I don't know, it's almost like politeness sounds like an oversimplification, but it's just there's like the polite discussion between nations, even if that's just a complete fiction, it's gone. And did that fiction of politeness or that fiction of fealty or whatever, did that have any role? Did that have any efficacy in world politics? And does it matter that may be gone, and will it come back?
My sense, Steve, is that because I've seen it over and over again, it's amazing how short the memory of people is. I mean, you put a Biden equivalent back in the US, and immediately, or, God forbid, an AOC or something like that, liberals in this country will look up to the US as the greatest. Again, now I'm going to make the same mistake as other people, but the greatest friend Canada's ever had. It like I don't know if you're aware, but there are many Canadians who used to go to, say, Florida in the wintertime, and because they can't stand Trump, they don't go anymore. Even though, when you think of it, the probability that um, the guy who was renting them a room or a cottage or whatever, probably 50% that he was a Democrat, right? So you're now taking it out on people that have absolutely nothing to do with the condition, out of spite, right? But you change the figurehead and the reaction will be completely different. I mean, I guarantee you within 6 months, the number of people moving, or not moving, but traveling to the US to shop or whatever is going to go back up again. I mean, you'll say this about Donald Trump, is that he elicits very strong responses in people, good or bad.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Jacques on this question, Steve, that I think there's going to be a short memory. I do think the Republican Party may not have much patience anymore for someone that's just polite and middle of the road. They kind of like the cult of personality as their figurehead. But as far as the rest of the world, so as far as the rest of the world, I think it's important that, and coming back to Carney's speech specifically, where he talked about the rules-based order, this idea that there was some order that managed the relationships between countries and trade and so on. But we always know that there's both a formal structure through which decisions get made and an informal structure. And it turns out there's also a hidden structure that's certainly at play. And I think that Carney is signaling in his speech to that hidden structure. Like there's a lot of, it seems like sort of coded messages that might have double meaning. If you're paying attention to formal politics, or if you're on the inside networks, you might interpret his speech a different way. And I think he's speaking to that hidden network. And like, this isn't a conspiracy theory to recognize like all the information coming out of the Epstein files right now, where clearly there is a network of very powerful people across many nations around the world who are all on a first name basis and communicate through intermediaries like Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if you're watching some of the letters that have been published recently, but there's a network of people that are engaging in these conversations and oh, I want to meet with Putin only if such and such, and he, if it's private and so on. And like these conversations are happening as though they're all just texting each other, and that network is actually much larger than we thought, than anyone thought. I think it's much larger than anyone thought. So there's a hidden network, there's an informal network of trade and relations, and then there's the formal network that Carney says is now over. The rules-based order is over, and he's power playing a sort of new structure that is going to be, he wants formalized. Having said all that, I think back to Steve's question, will the world just move on after Trump is out of that office? Yeah, I do. I think it'll just move on. Water under the bridge. Good, he's gone now. Now we can get back to the way we used to do things, they'll say. And the way they used to do things was through this sort of hidden or informal network. I mean, like, let me finish with this. Sorry. Carney is the very definition of the system. And like, he's the governor of the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of Canada formerly. He's at all the UN conferences, the COP20s conferences, the UN climate talks, the head of, chairperson of Brookfield. Like he's in his speech, he's almost pretending again to be like an outsider or the underdog. Like when he announced he would become the leader of the Libertarian Party, he claimed that he's an outsider. I think he's doing that again, even though he is the system. He's very much part of that system, and they want it to go back the way it was before Trump.
Yeah, just just to provide a little color or to remind people who are not as old as I am, between our two countries, we saw, say, around 1972, our prime minister and the US president disliking each other terribly. I mean, Nixon and Trudeau did not get along. In fact, Nixon was caught on tape referring to Trudeau as an SOB, I believe. But fast forward 10 years, and suddenly we got Reagan and Mulroney, who were as close with beneficial impact, because quite often you can get things fast-tracked if you're on good terms with people, as opposed to being at odds. But anyway, my point is 10 years, totally different picture, totally different temperature between the two countries. And so that's part of what I was referring to before. This idea that whatever happened in the prior 6 months means that that's what's going to happen over the next 60 years is nonsense.
Is there any validity to the idea that globalism is inevitable? I wonder about it from three specific reasons. One is population. So I mean, the more people there are in the world, the closer we are squished towards one another. And that tends to, I mean, higher populations tend to breed more progressive ideology. Second, the world is shrinking, technology and transportation, so we have so much more access to, other cultures, other countries, other, headline news. And then the third thing I think about quite often is and this goes back to what you said, Jacques, the lack of perspective in people under 40, certainly at least under 30. And, like a couple generations ago, people under 25 didn't have an opinion. There were, I mean, a 25-year-old in college or getting out of college would have no opinion because they weren't their father, and their father was the only one sitting at breakfast actually reading deep into the newspaper and hearing about what's going on around the world. And now you have that with this emotional, tragic, emergency sort of flare just pushed right onto their screens, and they're just sitting there consuming the suffering that's going on in Gaza, whatever is going on around the world, and feeling like with their black and white thinking that comes from a lack of perspective and a lack of life experience, and making judgments about this is what's right and wrong. And are those elements causing us to shift? I mean, regardless of the undulations back and forth, are we ending up in a more globalist society 50 years from now, like it or not?
Well, I wouldn't begin to make a guess. The only thing I can say is I fervently hope that globalization would be limited to free trade between countries. I certainly, I'll repeat myself, I do not want some kind of overseeing agency at the global level that dictates local policies. I mean, heck, as a libertarian, I don't want anyone to dictate how I conduct my life. So the very idea that we have countries being told which corporate tax rate they can have and which ESG they must have and whatever. I mean, the discovery of new ideas can only come through freedom. Having different countries attempt different things to see if they get better outcome than the next one. But this would be anathema to Carney. And Carney just does not think in those terms. He's a technocrat who believes that, like, he sees everything as a technical problem that can be solved by turning the dials just so. As I've said before, I think the man is fundamentally anti-freedom and all about top-down. So, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 50 years, but I certainly hope it will not be the type of globalism that he wants. Because the other thing too is that it's not just a question of this is the way it has to be done, but I'm the guy to do it because I'm smarter than the rest of you peasants. Even though, actually, before I forget, this rule-based stuff that he's talking about, like, is rich, given that, and Steve, you say you don't quite follow anymore, but just for your benefit and maybe some of the audience, is the federal government, when we had the trucker convoy, enacted or invoked the Emergencies Act, which was complete overreach. And they appealed, like the first judgment said, no, you didn't meet the threshold. You basically broke the law. The government appealed and they got defeated again. So we now have two rulings that say the invocation of the act was completely wrong, didn't meet minimum requirements, and so forth. There hasn't been a single comment on the part of any representative of the federal government. They have they have decided to let this sleeping dog lie. It's appalling, really. Like, I know why they're doing it, because it goes back to what I said before about short-term memory. Because a month from now, the Liberals, I would tell you this, they learned very well under Trudeau that if you can tolerate a storm for a week, maybe two, then it just dies down. People get tired and they don't mention it anymore. Because there was a time when the type of problems they encountered would have compelled a sitting minister to resign. But the Trudeau government, the people in the Trudeau government decided that they were going to take a chance on people's forgetting quickly, and they were right.
There's a lot there to talk to, and I'll try to wrap it back to Steve's question about whether globalism is inevitable. And I think not. I think there's probably an ebb and flow. That seems to me that the pendulum swings around with some degree of chaos. There are various power plays, various poles where power starts to centralize and then forms a monopoly and then collapses or shifts. So I don't think it's inevitable. I think fracture in power structures is just as inevitable as any kind of pursuit of globalization. And Jacques, speaking of rules and this phrase that Carney kept using in the speech about rules-based order, and actually the Liberal Party in Canada has been using that phrase frequently for the past few years. I think what they mean by that is that for a while, and through mechanisms like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and maybe NATO, that countries were generally playing by their rules. That's what he means by rules-based order, and that's no longer, he keeps saying that that's done, that's over. And I think that's just a realization that Trump is no longer playing by their rules. So he then, in the speech, and this is now the question I have for the two of you, as I try to segue into the next question. In the speech, he talked about value-based realism, and I wonder if you could unpack that for me. What does that mean? And he also talked about plurilateral coalitions. And maybe that speaks to this issue of globalization. Maybe he's going to pursue a new sort of globalism through these plurilateral or coalitions. And I think that just means he wants trade with countries other than the USA. So back to you. What does he mean by value-based realism, and what does he mean by plurilateral coalitions?
Well, my short answer is I don't know what he's talking about. This is, again, he strikes me as being almost an expert in cobbling together these words that make him sound like he knows what he's talking about, that he's sophisticated. But I don't know, if someone had dared pushing him and say, you know what, you're using all these terms and none of us understand what you're talking about. Can you please explain yourself? I don't know what he would have said. But I can't sit here and tell you that I know what that meant.
But it's that reason that I think he's signaling. It's like I consult with private corporations a lot, and I'm in boardrooms and I'm with executives, and they can speak around the boardroom table or around the executive table they speak with they develop a kind of ubiquitous language that is meaningful to them, and with just a short phrase they can make broad implications that everyone understands. They know what they mean, they know what each other means, and it's like these phrases are shortcuts. So through a simple phrase like plurilateral coalition, I think Carney is saying there's a whole volume of information there that if you're kind of in the know, you'll know what that means. So maybe those are the words that come up at the Davos conferences frequently. Maybe those are the words that come up at the COP26 and so on. And he believes his audience knows what those phrases mean. And he says them with this air of pseudo sophistication, because he also wants to be an elite even in that room. But again, he thinks that audience knows what those words mean. Steve, over to you.
I'm just going to go back to the text here. So, a world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And that, I'm not sure that is self-evident, but it is compelling. And then hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships, meaning, Trump's going to run out of Trump currency at some point. Like that, it will get dimmed over time. And I think I agree with that. But then skip down a couple paragraphs. Collective investments in resilience are cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses. Shared standards reduce fragmentations. Complementarities are positive sum. And the question for middle powers like Canada is not whether to adapt to the new reality. We must. The question is whether we adapt by simply building higher walls or whether we can do something more ambitious. That sounds disturbingly collectivist. That sounds like something red.
Yeah, collective investments in resilience. I mean, to me that sounds like socialism by another name.
Yeah.
But let's unpack whether he might be right. Oh, we lost Steve. Maybe his internet connection. So Jacques, Steve has just raised something kind of, what's the word? Intriguing. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, sorry, can you be more specific? Because he said a few things there.
Well, it's collective investment in resilience. Sounds to me like socialism by another name. Steve ended his, he cited the actual speech and then ended with this idea that this sounds very collectivist. And go ahead. Yeah, go on.
Well, yes. I mean, it's a recurring theme, right? It has. We have to. We have to get together. We have to agree on a whole bunch of, like when he talks about people who erect barriers or whatever are going to be poorer, but he's not. People like him are never arguing about free trade. It's always highly managed trade, as we're seeing right now with whether it's China or other countries. I'll lift this tariff or I'll reduce it if you do this in return. I mean, none of this is free trade, and I think from his point of view, we need more of that, like more of this management where we're telling all these countries, yes, you can trade, but you're going to trade on our terms, and we're going to dictate what those terms are going to be. Right? Again, freedom is out the window completely.
Yeah, welcome back, Steve. So Jacques was just pointing out it was relating to what you had said about this being a very collectivist attitude. There was a phrase or a term Steve, that you read from the speech about foundations. Sorry, could you go back to that?
Fortresses?
Fortresses, yes. Please reread that sentence, because I think that captures Jacques' point nicely.
Yeah, and I mean, well, he starts with a world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. But then later it's, collective investments is cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses.
Right. So
Meaning,
he's saying,
we can all agree, and I completely agree with Jacques on that, how technocratic that is and how short-sighted that is, probably.
yeah, I think what he's talking about is, the fortresses are the countries that don't want to play ball in the same game that he's playing. And collective investments means, hey, why don't you come and play ball the way we want to play it? That's how I interpret that paragraph. And actually, that's how I interpret his whole speech, is that he wants a new ball game in which he's among the people making up the rules.
Well, I think what it amounts to, this collectivist, is, think of the UN, right? Where countries turn over, I suppose, depending on your wealth status or whatever, but a fair amount to, or maybe an even better one, because I know there's so much resentment. But think of the European Union, where large amounts of money are sent to Belgium, but I forget Brussels. So it is sent to Brussels, where you got these so-called elected officials who then turn around and boss all of the member countries. And I think what Carney is after is something similar, but on an even grander scale. That would be global. Again, maybe with my first example of the UN, where there's an element of that. Like I think he's probably very unhappy to be prime minister of the country. I think what he wants is to be prime minister of the planet, because again, he knows best. Even though, I like to remind people he did a terrible job as governor of the Bank of England.
Okay, so our friend Guggenmoss, Alec, has made an interesting point. So is it possible, like in Carney's coded language, right? He talked about these plurilateral coalitions. And he had another phrase, something about geometric something. Again, it's speaking to these coalitions of middle powers. And for months now, in fact, since even before the Canadian election was announced, he had been talking about the United States no longer being a partner with Canada, that our relationship is over. Like, does he envision a sort of set? Maybe he envisions different sets of countries that will align new allyships that, as Alec points out, might become a new sort of standing Cold War. Like, it used to be United States versus Russia in a Cold War, but like Carney is aligning with the United Kingdom, the EU, Qatar. He talks about, their values are Canadian values. He's just met with Beijing. Does he intend to align these various countries into a set that will cooperate through collective investments? Because he sees there are fortresses against which they have to now play a new game? Is there a new Cold War that he's planning? Is that crazy to think?
From my perspective, I think very it's very, for all his, obvious education that far exceeds Trudeau, I think in Ottawa it is amateur hour again. I think this guy doesn't know what is going on, grasping at straws, trying to You know, it's simply extraordinary to me that he can be so close or attempt to be so close with China and Qatar, two countries that have terrible track records, say on human rights or freedom, and suddenly it doesn't care. He doesn't care. And it's all about this knee jerk reaction. I don't care because they are not Trump. It's as simple as that. It's extremely naive. It's like dealing with a 7-year-old.
Okay, so that
Like,
might be our best hope, actually, that he's incompetent and that his actions won't have significant impact.
well, let me put it this way. The best definition of arrogance I ever heard was to say someone who's arrogant is someone whose self view or self-worth is far in excess of their experience and intellect. And if I were, the leader of a larger party, I tell you, I would hammer at this over and over again because people do not care for arrogant people. But Carney, to me, is massively arrogant, and he needs to be brought down because he thinks he's way more capable than he really is. And I think in his speech, in the words he uses, I think he tries to bamboozle people and try to give them the impression that he's this, amazing guy. Again, I point to his record as governor of the Bank of England. He did a terrible, terrible job. But that never comes up. But it ought to, because to me, it is the poster child for someone who thought he could manipulate, or maybe not manipulate, but he could, again, turn the dials just so to make things work, just so, and he failed. He fell miserably. Well, if he cannot control the inflation rate in England, which onto itself is, I think asking too much, but it pales in comparison to all of the other things that now he has to manage. Well, he can do that one. He's going to fail at all the other ones as well. And in fact,
let's just clarify that when you say brought down, I think you mean with some humble pie. And then,
I mean, my view is that it has to be pointed out over and over again.
Steve, sorry, we lost you there for a few seconds. You're back. Over to you.
Just going back to something you said geometric. I think what you're referring to, we're doing something else to help solve global problems. We're pursuing variable geometry. In other words, different coalitions for different issues based on common values and interests, which to me, that sounds almost a little more free trade in its, at least rhetorically, meaning where we have interests, where it makes sense, we make some kind of political allegiances or strategic allegiances, and those don't have to be entire, but can they be? Like you said, Jacques, can we have meaningful economic trade with companies that have abysmal human rights records? Does that work? Does that, we're not going to trade human rights ideas with them, but we will trade cars and energy with them.
Well, don't misunderstand me here. I am not arguing that we should not have free trade with China. I'm simply saying that for people who are always going on about human rights, right? What I'm calling out here is the hypocrisy of the liberals, where they turn this thing on and off, right? Like sometimes human rights matter, sometimes they don't matter, right? If it happens to score points against Trump, then human rights don't matter. But then they would under different circumstances. This type of hypocrisy is nauseating.
So maybe I can bring our conversation to a focal point here and give us all a chance to kind of conclude our thoughts. The central question I think we should consider is, Carney obviously thought that he could use his time on the Davos stage to signal a change. Now we can debate what he means by that change, what he intends for that change, but he intended to set certain things in motion. But what do we think are the most likely outcomes? If we could predict the future, what do we think is really going to happen as a result of his speech, if anything? Who wants to take that first?
Well,
Jacques?
I think very little is going to happen. I think that people who are into, if you want to call it that, virtue signaling, got their moment. Boy, our guy speaks well. Look at this wonderful speech. Nothing's going to come out of it. And once again, within a month, 2 months, people will have forgotten about it. And I mean, I saw a cartoon the other day that exemplifies, I think, Carney quite well. And it was one of those, the old style in basket and out basket. Again, I'm dating myself, but the in basket was basically all the promises that he's made, right? And many of the people participating in this call right now, have mentioned it actually, right? He makes promises, or there's going to be free trade between provinces, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then the out basket was empty, right? I mean, there's very, very little to speak of in terms of actual outcome. I mean, he had to say in Davos that he's reduced the income tax in Canada. Technically true. But I believe that for most people, it amounts to $300 a year. Okay, so yeah, he didn't say a falsehood, but he certainly didn't say something that was meaningful. And but he talks about how they're going to accelerate this, and we're going to catalyze this, because that's his go-to word. But nothing's happening. Nothing. So anyway, short answer is I don't think it's going to do anything.
Steve, any thoughts?
Entirely agree. It will do very little. I think it will be forgotten. It was and maybe I was enamored too much by it because I listened to his speech, and very shortly after I listened to Trump's address to Davos in its entirety. And if you compare and contrast the two of those, Carney sounds pretty intelligent, in my opinion, but I think it was, he was playing to a pretty friendly audience there, and took the opportunity to say the popular thing, which interestingly he framed as the unpopular thing, but it was essentially exactly what everyone there wanted to hear in that circumstance. So yeah, I don't think it's going to change much. I think there's some interesting tidbits there. I think there's some things to ruminate on if we can divide them or excise them from the personality of Mark Carney or the history of Mark Carney, and just some of the one-liners, some of the statements. Is there any truth to that? What does globalism look like in the future, and is there an option or an opportunity for the world to have strong individual states working in any sort of cooperative way, cooperatively meaning free trade, ultimately just having a free exchange of ideas and goods and services, or are we stuck deciding whether we're going to homogenize it, turn it into a technocratic, bunch of levers that get pulled and everybody gets squashed under the machine like we've seen in past centuries, or do we just need to constantly fight each other? I don't know.
Are there any particular phrases that you want to dig into?
I mean, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. I guess that's, there's probably a lot of countries that feel like that. And how do they exercise? I mean, their only chip in the table is who I align with. And if I align with this larger or equal power in one way, they're asking me to align with them in other ways, or certainly turn my head or avert my eyes to other things that they're doing. And uh, and I think, I mean, the power structure right now is encouraging that, right? So, and how do you get away from that? How do you institute strong individual states? We're struggling with exactly the same thing in the United States. It's like we're this lurch towards federal power, this lurch towards central government, towards progressivism, and I voted for Trump, and I have people ask me frequently, "What about now? Now are you sorry you voted for Trump?" And I'm like, I'm not. Well, and then he does something else, and it's like, "What about now? Now certainly you must finally be sorry that you voted for Trump." And the question is, well, the alternative was to have more Biden, Harris type economics, Obama type economics, and I like Obama as president. I would much rather listen to Obama give a speech at Davos than Trump. At least it'd be eloquent and polite and interesting, but the politics are, can we have individual states that for the most part run themselves, but that we operate in a collectively cooperative way without becoming so collectivist? And I don't know. I don't know the process, if it's just a purely political process that we have to tolerate, I mean, but there's a lot of people in the world who are like, I am not okay living my life over here and knowing that somebody's living the wrong way across the street. I can't just be satisfied living my way, successfully over here. I have to enforce that rightness on everybody else, and we do that individually, certainly, and we're definitely doing it on a global scale. I don't know. Somebody answer that.
Well, yeah, there's so many questions embedded in there. I guess I'd like to just speak to sort of the recent question I asked both of you, which is, will anything actually, like, what will be the likely outcomes of Carney's speech? And I, like both of you, think maybe not much will change, but I do suspect that a few messages were landing in Carney's inbox from state leaders, heads of state that maybe wouldn't normally reach out to him or reach out to Canada. Like he's inviting the so-called middle powers to imagine new geometry. And so maybe, and I don't know that that's a good thing or a bad thing. One of the outcomes I do worry about is greater alignment with China. This is very high on Mark Carney's list of priorities, and I maybe this is just my own bias, but I don't see the Chinese Communist Party as a party that's interested in free and fair trade. I think they're a party interested in power plays, and Canada is about to get used in such a power play. They're already interfering in our elections, and Carney is turning a blind eye to that, obviously. So I wonder if one of the outcomes of his speech is he's made an open invitation for various heads of state to reach out to him. Maybe that will occur, and we don't know. But it's funny that I don't think he can. I don't trust him to be negotiating with any of them if he can't even align the provinces of Canada toward a common objective. Like, we can't trade between provinces yet. How does he think he's going to have these new geometries with various countries? It seems all very strange to me. I don't know what the outcome will be. Sorry, Steve, I'm not answering your question.
But David, so well put, because that is so true, right? So he fails as governor of the Bank of England. He can't get provinces within Canada to free trade.
He has a minority government.
But boy, he will gather this collection of medium power and
Realign the global order.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
and he can sound magnanimous while doing it.
Yes. And this thing about, being on the menu just makes me laugh. I think most Canadians feel that we are on the menu every single day.
Yeah. Well, guys, I really appreciate the time we've spent. We've been together about an hour, and I'd like to just maybe ask for your final thoughts. If there's something in the chat messages that has caught your eye, feel free, or we can pull a clip onto the screen if we want to react to any parts of his speech or other topics. But final thoughts, guys. Steve, would you like to begin? And don't feel rushed. Like if your final thought ends up in a new bird walk through more topics, I'm open to that too. But go ahead.
I'm going to say something incredibly trite, and that is, I think it's time for love, first mutual respect. Like we've seen in this country the divisiveness, turn into animosity, and now I don't even know now it's just ridiculousness. It's
you're on the verge of civil war, it looks to me.
Maybe, but most of us are still just kind of living our lives. The ones who want to go to war are these young adults who see things in such striking absolute terms, and are forgetting that the people that they want to go to war with are almost exactly like themselves in much the same circumstances. And the difference between being progressive and, well, certainly the difference between being Republican, Democrat in this country is in so many ways, it's just a razor thin line anymore. And you fall down on one side of the line or the other, and all of a sudden that's my team. And politics has turned from statesmanship into team politics, and I don't know how to right that ship or try to even nudge that ship without returning to politics of love. I mean, that's the overarching, all-encompassing word for it, is appreciation and interest in our fellow beings. Be that, and I think that libertarianism is love, but it's love with a lot of perspective, rather than just, well, I love my neighbor enough to tell him what to do, or I love my neighbor enough to make sure he doesn't make any mistakes. It's, I love and respect my neighbor enough to let him be, and to respect his own autonomy. And that's something that we really struggle with. And I guess that was my parting thoughts.
Love or prosperity, like, you're talking about this divisive atmosphere in the U.S., and I've wondered often if would that be the case if unemployment was at record lows and inflation was at record low, and would that be the case if people coming out of universities were finding jobs, but they're clearly not. Like I see it all the time. I see it every day where well-educated and well-meaning and well-credentialed people are just simply unemployed and have been for a very long time in the US and in Canada. Would things be different if the economy was thriving, or does the economy, when the engine is running, well, does that just hide the fracture?
I don't know that prosperity in and of itself makes things better. I think that prosperity just can lead to some of this divisiveness. I mean, the things we're arguing about and fighting over are often pretty silly. I mean, and go to another, I spent some time in Morocco earlier in 25, and it's like, record high unemployment of whatever we have, 6% or whatever, is not the 19% that they have in Morocco. And lots of other countries in the world. I mean, we are prosperous. I mean, in both of our countries, North America is a incredibly prosperous place. Yes, some people are doing better than others or whatever, but I don't know. It's selfless willingness to sacrifice, and that sacrifice, I think, is generally motivated by love.
Well, Jacques, over to you. That's Steve's put a pretty strong line in the sand there.
Well, I'm going to go in a totally different direction. Nice message, but I did want to acknowledge some of the comments that were made. And one of them, speaking of love, is that we had two different people, I guess, having a very, very different viewpoint on the number of Canadians going to the U.S. And speaking of love, I didn't see any nasty words or accusations or anything. But I wanted to point out to two of them that I think it is absolutely perfectly possible for both their impressions to be accurate, because sometimes these changes in behavior may or may not happen depending on your viewpoint. Like if the demographic of one of these people was such that, it say caters to more, people that are more Trump fans, or at least are not as bothered, that they would continue to go to the U.S. wouldn't surprise me. But if the demographic of a different provider here is mostly made up of the Laurentian elite, well, then I can see those numbers going down. Anyway, so nice input from both of them, but I simply want to point out that I think both of them are right. They just happen to talk to different demographics or
I believe you're talking about this one from Derek. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then there was another comment. So this one, by the way, it says, as a travel agent, I can say our bookings to the US have taken a nosedive over the last year, and our trips are still getting canceled. Here's another one from Boxcar Philly. I work for a company that drives snowbirds south for them in the fall and back in the spring. Oh, you take the cars south because they fly. Okay, I see. Jacques, is this the other one you were referring to?
Yeah, but he's got another post where he says the numbers haven't changed or something to that effect.
I'll look for that. I don't quite see it, but I'll find it. Yeah. Well, right after that, he explains that the business is not down.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. These are people who can afford to fly and afford to get someone else to drive their vehicle.
Yeah.
And their business is thriving or not down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but my final thought on this is that I think we were on the receiving end of a very nice word salad that is going to amount to essentially nothing. I have made the point before. I mean, Steve wouldn't know this, but on our podcast, that I do believe in the world of diplomacy. I think that sometimes in public, you shut your mouth. You don't try to antagonize people in public. You can try to do this in a polite way through private channels. I do not understand the habit that Trudeau and Carney have made of trying to antagonize the U.S. as, again, if you want to play to your base and you think you're going to score political points because you're going after someone that is not liked by a lot of people, yeah, maybe it'll get you political points, but I don't think it's necessarily going to help Canadians because as the point has been made over and over again, something like 85% of our trade is with the U.S. I think the reversal is less than 5%. We cannot win a battle like this. We have to learn to get along. Now, in my private life, I'm not one to bow down to anybody. So I understand the reaction that people would have to say, well, there's a limit to what we can do, and I can go along with that. But I certainly would refrain from making all these veiled references to, okay, yeah, he didn't call him by name, but everybody knew that he was talking about Trump. I mean, what do you think is going to be accomplished? What positive outcome do you expect to see out of this? And I personally don't see any. So, word salad that are not going to accomplish anything other than pissing off our neighbor to the south, and who knows what's going to happen with that. So, an F- to Mr. Carney.
Those are some good closing thoughts, Jacques, from your side. Steve, last words to you, and then we'll say goodnight.
Oh, I think that's great. I'll give him an F+. And and I like salad, so and I like words, but I don't disagree.
Yeah. Well, then I'll take the last word and just say it's so nice to see you again, Steve. I remember a few years ago I had the privilege of introducing you to Jacques, and we talked very much like we are now on screen, and we just had a nice conversation together. And so for those of you tuning in, much appreciated. We appreciate all the comments. I have to admit, though, I like these conversations maybe the most. Like I just get a chance to talk with an old friend and a new friend, and have a good night. So we were here on Facebook, YouTube, X, and hopefully Rumble. I changed that integration. Hopefully it worked this evening. So share it, like it, subscribe it, tickle the algorithms, and we'll see you again for the next conversation on Libertarian Lens, or our other show, the Libertarian Currents, where Jacques and I and maybe guests will react to current events. Steve, it'd be great if you want to join one of those as well. We can talk about more current events instead of like we did tonight, which was more of a theme, sort of topical, where we tried to stick our questions to a particular theme. So I'll reach out to you if you want to join one of those shows as well. How's that?
That would be great. And I didn't see any anti-American slurs in the comments, so I guess I'd be welcome back.
Yeah, I think so. I think you'd be welcome back. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night.